The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Network Collective's latest webinar on the topic of Is MPLS Dying? My name is John Waterhouse. I'm CEO of the Network Collective, and I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes. As I'm sure everyone knows, TNC is the UK's largest independent network and telecom strategy and sourcing consultancy, supporting over 240 major UK multinational companies, helping them get the best possible commercial, technical, operational and contractual results from their network and telecom solutions. I'm delighted to welcome so many people onto the webinar today. It's extremely busy. Joining me today is our CTO, Craig Northwest. Craig, would you like to say hello to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Hi, John, and hello to everybody joining us today. I'm hoping this will be an interesting webinar and you'll take away a lot from this session. Let's get stuck into it.
Good stuff. Right. So before we get to the meat, just a couple of quick housekeeping points. So we're going to be very strict on sticking to the 20-minute timetables. I'm sure everyone having their lunch will be delighted to know. And everyone who's logged in will get a copy of the slides afterwards, and we will try and respond to any questions that come in during the session, but any we don't get time to respond to, we will answer on email afterwards. So Craig, if you can just pop us onto slide 2, thank you very much. Right, so as we mentioned, the topic today is MPLS dying, and what we're going to try and do quickly but effectively is put the whole topic of the future of MPLS under the microscope. And the reason for this is TNC has noted over the last 24 months an increasing number of organizations reducing their utilization of MPLS. So to be clear, that doesn't necessarily mean they're moving away from MPLS entirely, although a few are, but that they're deploying less of their network connectivity using MPLS and substituting it for other technologies. So that's pretty big news, right? I mean, for the last 10-15 years, MPLS has been the industry standard for corporate networking, so any change to that is pretty seismic. So what we're going to try and go through today: why is that happening, what benefits the organizations making that change hope to achieve, what technologies they're using instead, and does this mean that MPLS is dying, or is it alive and well, or is it in fact already dead? Now, the data we're going to draw on for this is something which we call our Buying Behaviors Index, or BBI. So, as everyone knows, TNC leads more network procurement processes for more organizations than anyone else. So we have more insight into what's really going on in the market than anyone else. So, and of course, crucially, we're vendor independent. So we're not trying to push an agenda, we're not trying to persuade anyone to buy any particular technology or go down any particular route. What we're trying to say is, let's strip out all the marketing messages, let's strip out everything the vendors would like you to think and believe, and let's talk about what's actually going on in the market here and now. So, Craig, can you just flip onto the first BBI?
There we go.
Just very quickly, I'll just explain to everyone listening what they're seeing. So the BBI is a way in which we try and show what's going on in the market and a couple of key points. So the technologies on the left are the least mature, the technologies on the right are the most mature and indeed heading into retirement, and the technologies at the bottom are the least adopted and the ones at the top are the most adopted. And what we're trying to show across these two BBIs is the current state of the market. Then that's based on the real world data we're developing through our procurement processes, and the future state of the market. And I think particularly it's important to note that that data is reflecting what we're seeing in procurement processes here and now, which obviously the networks people are going to be deploying over the next 12 or 24 months are the networks that they're starting to strategize and procure now. So we're trying to reflect the real world of what we're seeing. One last thing to note on these is we've merged UK and multinational data on these particular BBIs. And that's important to note because we are actually seeing a little bit of differentiated behavior. So our multinational customers are moving more quickly away from MPLS compared to the domestic customer base. And again, we'll perhaps talk on some of that. So, ton of background, hope that was useful for everyone. let's get into the analysis. So Craig, looking at this first BBI, can you talk us through what's going on here?
Yeah, sure. So what we show in here, and as John described the layout of the BBI, we can see if you look at the top right hand side of the matrix, we've got two technologies up there. So we show MPLS as still over the last 12 months being a highly procured technology, particularly in the UK market. That kind of coupled in terms of the market penetration alongside hybrid. So the hybrid technology is always generally going to be a mix of MPLS access circuits and internet access circuits that can be procured either through a single vendor, through regional vendors, or through a effectively localized circuit access from an internet point of view, and maybe regional MPLS access circuits. I think interestingly, as we kind of look down into the middle of the matrix around what people have been considering over the last 12 months, we've got two key models in there, two key technology models. We've got something called DIY SD-WAN. So this model particularly would be where organizations effectively look for off-the-shelf SD-WAN capabilities and deliver the solution over their existing MPLS networks, or potentially just pure internet networks, or potentially a mix of both. The reason why they're opting for this is that they get lots more dynamic capabilities in terms of how they route traffic, lots more visibility into the applications that are running across the network, and ultimately it's seen potentially as the more innovative way wide area networks are going in the future. Slightly below that, we've got the telco SD-WAN model. So telcos, given the fact that lots of organizations have started considering a DIY approach, do-it-yourself type approach to SD-WAN, telcos are slightly concerned that they potentially could lose out on revenue by people moving away from a complete managed service within a telco. So we're starting to see telco capabilities develop specifically around the SD-WAN solutions, and for some organizations who may have big single contracts on MPLS or hybrid platforms, starting to consider what that would look like in a telco world as well. On the far left hand side, particularly where we're showing this as something that's still in development within the market at the minute, but some customers particularly that have highly agile environments, particularly some of our construction customers, starting to look at new innovative solutions that are coming to the market in the form of a network as a service. So this is a kind of pure play SD-WAN capability, which will ultimately have zero touch provision, kind of cloud-based orchestration capabilities to allow you to develop networks on the fly, tear down networks on the fly, which aligns to that type of organization. I guess the key thing we'll be showing again on this is current state, predominantly on the topic of today's MPLS die-in. What we have seen over the last 12 months is that MPLS, and particularly kind of hybrid with a component of MPLS, has still been the prominent technology model that's been procured from many of our UK domestic and global organisations.
So just a question on that, Craig. So if you took a snapshot right here, right now, where people are going from MPLS is hybrid.
Yeah.
They're talking about SD-WAN more than they're actually buying SD-WAN. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. Again, looking back the past 12 months, and I guess if we look at the market, I guess over the last 18 to 24 months, the conversation around SD-WAN has significantly been increasing. We've had lots of conversations with customers looking at options to consider SD-WAN, even running RFIs for SD-WAN. However, the process outcome, particularly around procurement aspect, has generally resulted in hybrid or MPLS technologies being deployed for many of these organisations. A couple of reasons for that. I think if you look at the technology lifecycle angle of this, some of the SD-WAN capabilities are relatively new. Some are proprietary. There's limited standards in place at the minute around integration with some of these capabilities. So when it comes to drawing up a contract, looking at the implementation, looking how it will be managed from a vendor point of view, from a service and technology point of view, some of the maturity of these technologies is just not there yet, or hasn't been to date. Therefore, many organisations have opted to stick with, I guess, what is a relatively safe technology model within hybrid capability or an MPLS capability.
Okay, so just a very quick question before we move on. Why are people changing? What is it that makes them say, hey, I used to buy MPLS, now I'm buying hybrid, now I'm kicking the tires of SD-WAN? What is it about MPLS that's making people look at other things?
So the key driver that we see is a change in the application landscape. So traditionally, MPLS has been a very much fit for purpose solution where all the applications and data services, etc., sit within enterprise data centers or regionally distributed data centers, or even some localized applications. The MPLS platform has given the reach, it's given the security, it's given the kind of performant access to them applications. I think what's been changing, and it's obviously well publicised, and many organisations on the phone on the webinar today listening will be probably pursuing some form of cloud wherever possible strategy, where they're seeing their key enterprise applications maybe moving into SaaS or IaaS platforms. That changes the dynamic in terms of how you connect to them applications, and a lot of organisations are seeing that I guess a closed-in MPLS network is quite restrictive to how they can get access to them in a performant manner. Hence the introduction of hybrid, providing some local internet services, but with a almost manual stroke static configuration. I think where people are now starting to focus on SD-WAN, that capability to access them platforms much more dynamically through kind of multipath control, through application-based routing, performance-based routing, the key benefits that come with SD-WAN. That's where people are starting to say, well, that's the model that we want to take in the future. But as we said, the maturity of it over the last 12 months anyway has just not been there for organisations to be able to contract in a similar vein as what they would do on an MPLS or hybrid solution.
Okay, so just focusing on that, and one last question, and we must move on to the next BBI, but just one last question on this. The sentiment very often, if you kind of go and ask 10 people what their view is on hybrid networks, the first thing almost everyone says is they're cheaper than MPLS. There's a view that basically every other technology on that BBI, apart from MPLS, is cheaper than MPLS. Mm-hmm. But is that actually, that is the kind of market sentiment, and I know a lot of vendors who are out there very keenly telling that story. Is that our experience?
So it can be. There are ways to make hybrid technologies and potentially DIY SD-WAN particular global models to be cheaper than MPLS, for sure, particularly on a global scale. So if you're looking at a straight like-for-like access circuit replacement with internet, for instance, with an SD-WAN overlay, then that access service would be cheaper. However, if you take into consideration other aspects of cost management, service-related costs in terms of SLA, replacement of infrastructure, potentially globally distributed teams to support some of that, these are the costs that often don't get picked up in the marketing collateral for some of the providers. And
the SD-WAN itself has a cost, right? The SD overlay, it's not free.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to do a comparison against hybrid with, say, DIY SD-WAN with still the same components of hybrid, then that's in effect potentially just additional cost for the capability to do the dynamic routing and application visibility and kind of key control in terms of optimizing the platform. So yeah, we do see in the process that we run that actually the DIY SD-WAN route and telco SD-WAN route potentially can just add cost over and above a hybrid. Hence, hybrid still being the kind of dominant model.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So let me try and summarize that slide, and then we must move on. So why is this happening? It's a change of application demand. So people want a network that performs in a different way. The benefit they believe they're getting is that improved access to the applications, potentially with hybrid a commercial benefit as well. And obviously we can see the technologies that are being replaced. As we move on to the future state, we've had a number of questions in around, okay, MPLS was very performant. Everyone knows that. Well, the benefits of MPLS was you could run kind of any application over it. You could use QoS to ensure, for example, voice was performant, video, etc. If we're moving away into a hybrid environment, if we're moving into an SD-WAN environment, how how would organizations achieve that? But let's tackle that kind of as we talk about what the future state looks like. So take us through sort of how we're seeing things 1-2 years down the line.
Yeah, so if we kind of build this slide up in terms of the future state, so this is largely driven by active processes that we're working on at the minute and the potential outcomes of them processes. So we can see obviously a particular maturity of the SD-WAN capabilities in terms of technology lifecycle. So moving into that ratified technology perspective from a lifecycle point of view. I guess one of the key things to note here is that MPLS is still in the mix. So we do still see lots of organisations still considering MPLS. Again, particularly UK domestic organisations where it doesn't always make sense to look at hybrid or even internet only from a cost perspective, because there's not a significant difference between the two. But we do see it dropping off from a market penetration point of view. So we don't see it going fully into being retired as a technology for quite a few years yet. Probably 5, 6. I think we'll still be talking about MPLS. But we do see the penetration of the market in terms of the number of organisations buying it as a pure platform reducing over the years. We do still see hybrid up there as probably the prominent model, again, particularly with global organisations, largely due to the fact that many organisations don't have the deep requirements to have a dynamic network and dynamic capability. They're quite happy with a relatively static, simple hybrid design that will still have an element of MPLS in there with potentially some local internet.
That's a really interesting point, because I know one of the things, I'm cheating because I'm referring back to previous webinars we've done and conversations we've had, but time and again, the conversation around SD, right here, right now, it injects potentially a cost and a complexity, and the vast majority of organizations don't actually appear to have a specific need for the functionality it brings. But obviously, as we're seeing that rise up in the market, is that basically as the market deals with those issues, it becomes more popular? Yeah, I think there's two things. So I guess it's worth calling on one of the biggest things that we've shown as a kind of rise into the kind of ratified and being procured and higher market penetration. So the telco SD-WAN model. So I think this will ultimately become a de facto model for most telcos. So they'll move away from managed MPLS, managed hybrid networks, to just becoming a managed WAN, which will be based on SD-WAN technology. So by default, you will be able to have them capabilities that get delivered as part of SD-WAN. So that's just natural progression of WAN edge technology, I believe, which will ultimately be introduced as part of a managed offering from a specific telco, whether that's a regional, global, or domestic telco. I think that stuff will start coming out of the box. Hence, we see that becoming ultimately the replacement model for most organisations now that have a managed contract, a significant managed contract with a telco. And is that how you address topics like how do you run voice outside of an MPLS environment? Is the answer SD-WAN, or is the answer also advances in how hybrid is designed? I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, so I think it's both things. So all of this. So when we're obviously at the start of a project with a customer and understanding the need for the network, understanding their requirements, defining the kind of key principles around what the procurement process needs to deliver, they are key questions that we try to understand. What applications require that kind of real-time performance transit. Will that mean that's part of that future SD-WAN or future, next generation WAN, if you like? There will still need to be an element of MPLS in the mix to be able to provide that capability. That's why we see and fully expect that there will be MPLS around for many years, because some organizations who have critical telephony, for instance, or have a critical video type service, moving that onto a pure SD-WAN based on internet, or moving it even into just an internet only type platform, are always going to be moving to best endeavor SLAs. So organizations that need to retain SLAs to back up the business capability
will still always probably need to opt for some aspect of MPLS as part of their overall WAN design in the future.
Okay, so that's a really interesting point. So where we're showing MPLS declining, we're not necessarily saying that in the current state, 100 organizations have MPLS. In the end state, only 20 do, and 80 have something else. It's more actually that 100% of organizations will probably still have some MPLS. It's that instead of it connecting 100% of the sites, it's connecting 20. Is that? Yes.
It's exactly that. So I think we'll talk less about it as being a pure play platform around, you know, organizations only connect to MPLS. So I think in the future it's highly unlikely that most organizations will only connect to an MPLS network. It's highly likely that they will have a mix of MPLS, internet services, cloud connectivity, these types of services which make up a more dynamic WAN. So that's kind of what we're showing there within the telco SD-WAN. So they're building the core capabilities, incorporating things like network function virtualization in there, cloud optimization access. That will become much more intelligent WAN capability than what MPLS is today, and effectively what hybrid delivers as well. I think the DIY SD-WAN piece will still be prominent. I think as the telco's service matures, more organizations will be more comfortable going to a telco than trying to do it themselves, namely because some of the issues that we mentioned around service management, vendor management, even things like billing management, for instance, is going to be quite difficult when you're trying to do it all yourself.
Yeah, okay, that's really, really interesting. I'm conscious of time. We're already 22 minutes into a 20-minute webinar, so we're going to be quite quick to wrap up. There's one last question I did want to pick up on that's come into us. It's quite interesting. I'm going to paraphrase it. It appears like we're saying that the application is becoming the driver more so than cost. I think that's I mean, from my own commercial experience, I would say, yeah, probably that's right. As in, customers aren't turning up and saying, hey, I want to take 20% out of my WAN costs. They're more likely to be turning up saying, hey, I want to make my WAN perform better for the myriad of new challenges being thrown at it. Is that fair?
It absolutely is fair, I think, yeah. So just quickly on this last slide, you know, you'll see the first blob at the top of the circle there is all around applications. It's all around the profile of where the applications sit. So we've talked about this, John, in the past with customers. You know, the key thing when trying to define a strategy for the network is to understand where the applications are and where the users are and how to connect the two most appropriately. So it is absolutely all about application landscape, application strategy, then trying to build traffic profile and understanding the best performant routes, whether that's internet, whether it's MPLS, whether it's point to point, whether it's cloud connect, whatever it might be, and then kind of developing a specification around what it is you actually go out to buy. So in some customers that may be MPLS, in some customers it may be hybrid, in some customers it may be a flavor of SD-WAN, maybe telco, maybe DIY. There's lots of different options available, but it is largely driven now by the applications that are being consumed and the location of users consuming them. But cost obviously is still a key component of this as well. You don't want to be just adding on effectively bells and whistles for additional cost. Most organizations still do want to reduce cost whilst moving to this type of platform. Yeah.
That's really, really interesting. Craig, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. We're a little bit over time. I feel like there's about 1,000, well, we've got about 15 more questions we could have answered. Apologies to those we didn't answer. We will get to them all on email, though. I feel I have about another 50 questions I'd like to ask you, but we'll have to save those for another webinar. If you wouldn't mind flicking onto the last slide.
Yes, no problem. Here we go.
That's the one. So thank you all very much for joining. Hopefully that was a useful session, a teaser and a taster at best, I guess, because there's so much to drill down into from a commercial perspective. We haven't even touched really on operating model, but of course that's a huge topic that comes out of a movement away from MPLS into hybrid, into SD, potentially leads to a change in operating model. I think we're going to have to have a whole webinar on that in a few weeks' time. So if anyone would like to ask more questions or have a, get a one-on-one session with us to talk about their organization in more detail, we'd be really happy to do that. Contact details on the screen, or obviously you find us online, etc. Yeah, we'd love to continue the conversations. So thank you again, Craig. Thank you everyone for joining, and
thank you,
speak to you all again soon.